Todd was appointed as director of Wyoming DEQ by Governor Matt Mead in October of 2012, and then subsequently reappointed by Governor Gordon in 2019. He has 27 years of experience with the department, including 7 years in the dual role of Deputy Director and Administrator of the Industrial Siting Division. After earning his bachelor's degree in Natural Resources and Fisheries Management, and then his master's degree in public administration, environmental policy, both from The Ohio State University. He worked for the Ohio Fire Marshal as an environmental supervisor. Todd also spent time in the private sector as director of operations for the environmental consulting firm BHE Environmental. Todd has served as president of the Environmental Council of States in 2017 and 2018. And is also a standing board member on our Hobbs School Advisory Board, who's meeting this week. It gives me great pleasure, Todd, after our reacquaintance, to introduce you, a wonderful public servant, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you, Todd.
We're still not sure if we weren't switched at birth.
Same hair.
All right. Well, thank you, John. And thank you for the invitation to be here today and talk about the DEQ and a little bit about what's happening in the state and on the federal scene in environmental protection. First thing I want to do is recognize that this is the 50th anniversary of the DEQ, which is a major milestone. Governor Gordon signed a proclamation in June commemorating the 50th anniversary and recognizing the agency's many accomplishments over the years. Now, the formation of the Environmental Quality, or Department of Environmental Quality, and the Environmental Quality Act, there were many key leaders in the state responsible for that. Some notable ones, I won't mention them all, but two that I want to mention is one is John Turner. John Turner was a senator or a legislator from Teton County who was very instrumental in the passage of the Environmental Quality Act and the creation of the DEQ. He later went on to become the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then the other name that I'd like to just throw out there is Marilyn Kite. And I didn't realize this until I was looking at the 1974 annual report. Don't ask me why I was looking at the 1974 annual report. But in there was an organizational chart, and in there was Marilyn Kite as the legal officer for the DEQ in the first years of the agency. There have been 6 directors of the DEQ over the years. The first was Bob Sundin, followed by Randy Wood, Alan Edwards, Dennis Hemmer, and John Cora. Now, as a little bit of a trivia, there's one of the past directors also served as deputy director after serving as the director, and that's our current deputy director, Alan Edwards, who was the director of DEQ back in 1989. So when the Environmental Quality Act was passed back in 1973, there were 3 primary divisions: air, water, and land. And since that time, we've taken on more and more responsibilities, but we remain a relatively small agency. We have 262 full-time employees, down from our peak of about 280 back, I'd say around 2012. I always talk to John Cora, and we talk about how he built the agency up to 280. And I said, well, I've spent my career trying to tear it back down. So it seems, because of budgetary constraints and so forth. But what we do is we learn how to become more efficient and more streamlined in the work that we do, since we are taking on more and more responsibilities. So right now we have 7 divisions, and I break it up in a particular way. So we have our air quality division, water quality, and the solid and hazardous waste divisions. And those I put together because The primacy for programs are with primarily the Environmental Protection Agency. Then we have our land quality and abandoned mine land program. And the primary agency for primacy is the Department of Interior Office of Surface Mines. But that's very specific to coal. And when you look at land quality, there are many other things that the Land Quality Division works with, like trona, like bentonite, uranium, and so forth. Now, the other two divisions would be the Industrial Siting Division, and that is a Wyoming-specific statute for the siting of large-scale industrial projects. And then we have our Administration Division, which manages the financial aspects and grants and so forth of the agency. So we have many delegated programs in the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, and with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Recent programs where we received primacy include becoming an agreement state with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and that happened back in 2018, and it's very specific to uranium mining and milling operations. The other one that's significant, and you've heard about already, is the Class 6 underground injection control with carbon sequestration. We were the second state in the country to receive primacy for that program in 2020. Now we have a couple of areas where primacy is pending, and that's with the coal combustion residuals with our Solid and Hazardous Waste Division, and with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission expanding our agreement state status to include source material from rare earth mineral mining operations. It was determined that there's enough uranium and thorium that is produced with these rare earth mines that it becomes a source material and subject to licensing by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So why is it important that we obtain primacy? Well, the biggest factor is that we can permit and license or provide licenses or permits and operate the programs at about half the cost, and our timeliness is about half of what you would see from a federal agency. And that's not necessarily a criticism of the federal agencies, it's that we're designed to implement the programs. And in fact, we implement most of the environmental programs through the state. So under the core principles of cooperative federalism, EPA is designed to set standards, and the states are set up to actually implement the programs. And we being all the states combined, implement about 90% of all federal environmental programs. Now, there's some programs in Wyoming that we've chosen not to pursue primacy for. And one of those is the drinking water program. We're the only state in the country that doesn't have primacy for the drinking water program. We've had conversations with the legislature many times over the years, exploring whether or not we should pursue that. But with the expanding nature of issues in the drinking water program and the cost, we've been content with having EPA Region 8 be the implementers of the drinking water program. Another program is the 404 permitting that is done by the U.S. Corps of Engineers, 404 of the Clean Water Act. It's something that is available to the states. There are only, I think, 3 or 4 states that have primacy for the 404 program, but it's something that we'll continue to watch. So you've probably heard that Wyoming takes an all of the above, and as Randall Luthi says, and a everything below energy approach. And that's oil and gas, coal, wind, solar, nuclear, hydrogen, pumped water storage, et cetera, et cetera. And if I get the next slide, but the key point behind this is there is no free lunch. And this is an article that I like, Ray Troll. But it makes the point, there is no free lunch. All of these different energy sources do have challenges associated with them, whether it's an air quality issue, managing the solid waste at the end of the day, disposal of wind blades, as an example. And then there's mining for the components that go into wind, or the components that go into solar. So we just have to be mindful that we have to recognize that they all have their challenges, and we need to be prepared to address those. So let me just talk a little bit about staff and the culture of DEQ, because it is the staff and the culture that's key to success. So I want to acknowledge that we do have an incredible team of professionals at DEQ. We also have tremendous leadership from all of our division administrators. But our focus and our culture is to assist the regulated community in navigating the regulatory landscape that's out there, with the goal of achieving compliance with the standards and regulations. In this approach and this culture results in protection of public health and the environment, and focuses on outcomes. So, and you've probably heard this before, but it is a false choice to have environmental protection or economic development. We can and we do have both. So just to put a point on that, DEQ is a great place to work. We have great opportunities for a rewarding career. We're working with the Hobbs School and Dean Kaprowski on internships and creating a pipeline of talent from the university to DEQ. Last year, we had 8 interns. In the next year, we just signed a memorandum of understanding with the Hobbs School. So we'll have 10 internship opportunities next year, and hopefully in following years after that. Now, I was going to invite you to visit with some of our staff at a table that we were going to have here, but unfortunately, I think because of the highway situation, you can go to the table, there just won't be anybody there. But I will be around. I'll be happy to talk to you about opportunities with the DEQ and so forth. So if we're fortunate, those folks will make it over this afternoon, and you'll have an opportunity to visit with them. All right, so now I want to talk about some recent challenges. One of the big challenges that we face today is the pace and scale of new rules and grants and grant opportunities from the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, which they affectionately call Bill and IRA. But on the rule side, there are 70 new federal air quality rules that are expected to be finalized in the next year. Now, that puts a strain on our staff as well as EPA staff, because on the state side, we have to review, comment, develop state implementation plans, implement the programs, and then provide the required reporting. And in some instances, maybe even some litigation. Now, on top of the staffing challenges that presents, is that the federal funding remains flat. And it has remained flat for the last 15 years. So when you add 70 new rules to the system, it really is an unfunded mandate to the states. So on the grant and the rule front, and these are EPA's own words, is that they're also suffering from grant and rule fatigue. And this is coming from the highest levels at the agency. And they're recognizing that the pace and the scale of what's coming down is really stretching the existing resources. So we also need to, as we look at the new programs coming in and the new grant opportunities that might be out there, we also have to be mindful that we need to focus on meeting timelines and requirements of existing rules. Because if we don't, the result will be additional lawsuits. So as I mentioned, states implement about 90% of all federal environmental programs. And we do this, and we strive to do this in a way that recognizes cooperative federalism principles. Back in 2016, 2017, the Environmental Council of States, which is an organization that represents, or that is made up of all of the state directors across the country. So this group, ECOS, and the Western Governors Association have pressed the federal agencies to embrace the concept of cooperative federalism, where you can rely on state knowledge and expertise, and then look at how you're doing oversight as a federal agency, and whether or not you're too heavy-handed. But the focus should be on the outcomes and not the outputs. And then I just want to point out that we've made a lot of progress. We did make a lot of progress from 2017 to 2020, where EPA actually embedded the concept of cooperative federalism into their strategic planning, into their compliance and enforcement documents, recognizing that they do have an oversight responsibility, but they can do that in a way that recognizes that the states are partners in implementing these environmental laws. And I will say that Gina McCarthy had, when she was the administrator, she made a great point. She said, everybody needs to stay in their lane. We'll be more successful implementing these programs if states and EPA stay in the lanes that they were designed to be in. If we don't do that, there are adverse impacts to the states and the public opportunity to participate in the process. So I want to give you a couple of examples. One of them would be related to what's called the climate pollution reduction planning. And under that, the states were eligible to receive $3 million to develop plans for climate pollution reduction activities. So we had submitted our plan. We were told that we could call it what we want, and then work with the region on what would be in our scope of work. And we did that. And we worked with the Region 8 out of Denver, and when we made our submittal, it was deemed approvable. And then as we started working through the grant process, they changed it back, because we had called our plan the Cowboy State Pollution Reduction Plan. Well, they changed it back to the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan, but that wasn't the biggest concern that I had. The biggest concern I had was they changed the scope of work. They took our scope of work out, which was already determined to be something that was approvable, and replaced it with EPA's own scope of work. So that's something that we're currently working with EPA on, trying to resolve that disagreement. And that will determine whether or not we proceed with or accept those grant funds. The other example that I'd like to provide, where it would be more beneficial if cooperative federalism principles were being utilized, and that's with the short turnaround times on the number of significant rules that are coming out. Some of these rules are thousands of pages, and to do a meaningful review on those in 60 days when they're stacked on top of each other is very difficult, and strains our staff and EPA staff. So with that, I would just say that we're asking for EPA for better and more meaningful engagement, that they embrace cooperative federalism principles, because after all, we recognize that we work better when we work together. So I want to now move to another challenge that we have been dealing with, and that's related to vacancies in our air quality division. Over the last 2 years, we had a 26% vacancy rate in our air quality division. So you have to take a look at, well, why is that? And the main sources of the issue would be one, we didn't at the time we didn't have competitive compensation packages. And interestingly enough, when I was looking at this 1974 report, that was one of the things that was raised in the 1970 report was competitive salaries was a challenge for the agency. So it's an age-old challenge. But the other part of it is that we're competing for specific and specialized skill sets in air quality. And we're competing with industry, we're competing with consultants, we're competing with other states. As an example, Colorado. Colorado has approximately 400 full-time employees just for air quality. In Wyoming, we have 74. Colorado added 120 new positions just in the last 2 years. Now, some of that is a result of the fact that they're dealing with not achieving the ambient air quality standards, where we don't have that same issue in Wyoming. So that's part of it. But the point being is that they're now recruiting from surrounding states to fill those vacant positions. The flip side of that is, in a couple of years, I know where I'm going when we're going to be recruiting for air quality positions. We're going to Colorado because they'll have plenty of well-trained folks on staff. So the other issue is that EPA is also actively recruiting, and they're actively recruiting our staff and other state staff, which, from my perspective, I encourage our staff to be in a position that they want to be in. And so if they want to go work for EPA, great, or another state, great. We'd like to be able to retain them, and we'd like to be able to recruit folks to the state. But again, from EPA's perspective, we're the implementers, and we need to have the resources to implement these programs. And so it's difficult when our folks are being recruited by EPA because some of their salaries we can't compete with. And I'll just give you one example. In the Class 6 underground injection control program, actually, maybe I shouldn't say this because we have somebody from that program here. But they had a position that they posted for a permit writer with a salary of $200,000. We can't compete with that. So those are some of the challenges that we see there. So what have we been doing to address this? Well, first off, Governor Gordon and the legislature worked very hard and supported salary adjustments over the last 2 years. And that made a huge difference. And we've seen that. It's made a huge difference to retention and recruitment. But in addition to that, we recognize that we have a group of specialized air quality positions that we also need to address. And so we worked with the governor, joint appropriations, the budget office, and the Department of Administration and Information to develop an air quality specific salary adjustment for 50 critical high demand positions. And that went into effect September 1st. So where are we today? We're currently down from 26% vacancy rate to 16%. So it's making a difference. We're having better luck with recruitment and with retention. Those vacancy numbers are the lowest they've been since mid-2021. And why it's a critical thing and why it's so important, it's because most economic activity that we're seeing in the state today needs to go through air quality permitting, and we want to avoid becoming a bottleneck to state economic development. So this is where I was going to mention that you should go out and visit with our staff again, but when they get here, please do. All right, now I want to get into some specific programs and where we are with them. The first is that I want to mention is environmental audit. In the statute today, 3511-1105, that was passed back in the 90s, we have a program called an environmental audit program. And that's where a facility can do an audit of their facility and identify any non-compliance issues, correct them, and then come up with a plan to prevent future non-compliance. We have had that program on the books since the mid-90s, as I said, but it was really not being used. Back in 2018, I worked with Doug Benevento, who was the region 8 administrator at the time, and we came up with an MOU that if a company in Wyoming uses that self-audit law, that EPA will not overfile if they comply with our requirements. And that was a big deal because a lot of folks we had heard from didn't want to use the self-audit program because they were afraid that EPA would come in and overfile on that. So this gave us the guarantee that we could use the self-audit program, which has been very successful. 18% of our facilities permitted by air quality have used that. And we see significant reduction as a result in NOx and VOC emissions each year. And in fact, we received a national award from the Organization for Air Quality in 2022 for the success of that program. So the next one I want to visit on is exceptional events. Exceptional events are things like wildfires that might occur, and then has impacts on what is read on an ambient air quality monitor. And what we're trying to measure with these ambient air quality monitors is what the anthropogenic impacts are and whether or not we're achieving the standards and protecting public health. But when you throw in the wildfires into the mix, it artificially raises the impact from anthropogenic sources. And so you do what's called an exceptional event package, where you verify the event that occurred and show that it was an exceptional event. You submit that package down to EPA, and then EPA either approves or agrees with or doesn't. And then that information is excluded from modeling and other efforts. So the problem here is that EPA, quite frankly, just doesn't have the bandwidth to go through all those exceptional events that all the states are submitting. And as a result, when they do modeling and are trying to identify areas of anthropogenic source contribution, it skews the data. And that's very problematic in a lot of ways. But also problematic is we spend $20,000 to $100,000 for each exceptional event package, and then it gets put on a shelf, and that's a bit frustrating. So we're working with EPA because they recognize that they have a bandwidth issue as well, and so we're working with them to try to improve that process. The next topic is on regional haze. Regional haze is a visibility rule. It's not a public health rule. It's on visibility. And it's for visibility on Class 1 airsheds at 156 national parks and wilderness areas. There have been, well, on the first round of regional haze, EPA had approved 10 of our actions and disapproved 5. And Wyoming sued over those disapprovals. Some NGOs sued over some of the approvals. The 10th Circuit recently ruled in our favor and found that EPA couldn't rely on guidance and that they could only rely on the Clean Air Act and their rules. So then it's been remanded back to EPA, and we'll have further conversations around that. And then there's Regional Haze Round 2. So the Regional Haze program is designed that you will have a glide path from the start of the program to 2064, and then you will have achieved your visibility goals by 2064. So Regional Haze Round 2, we submitted our plan. EPA failed to approve or disapprove of that plan. And we have filed a 60-day notice of intent to sue EPA for not taking that action within the required time frame. And the reason we've done that, there's really two principal reasons to do that. First one is to make sure that we have a seat at the table. Because what we've seen in some areas of the country is that a third party will file a suit against EPA because they missed a non-discretionary timeline. And then the state is barred from participating in the settlement discussions. So we want to make sure we preserve our ability to at least be part of that conversation. And the other reason is it's to make the point that as we add the scale and the pace of new rules, we need to be mindful that we need to comply with the rules that we have on the books now, and that EPA needs to make sure that they have the bandwidth to do that. All right, so that takes us to Regional Haze Round 3, and that's currently due in 2028. And then we'll have another round of demonstration of reasonable progress every 10 years thereafter. All right, so let's talk about ozone. This one is referred to as the good neighbor rule. It's also referred to as the cross-state air pollution reduction rule. And it's also referred to as the interstate transport rule. So you hear those different terminologies, it's all the same thing. So as a state, we have to submit a state implementation plan to EPA for approval on how we're going to ensure that we're not going to impair the air shed in a neighboring state. Well, we submitted our plan, and EPA had it for 1,237 days. They issued a federal implementation plan to Wyoming, along with 23 other states, without reviewing our state implementation plan. So EPA argued that Wyoming was contributing to ozone non-attainment in Denver at the Chatfield Reservoir. We argued that they're using an incorrect model. They were using a model that was designed for eastern states, and for western states, there are other factors that you need to incorporate into the model to do a fair assessment. So EPA ran a modified model, their version 3, and Wyoming was determined to be below the threshold for contributing to the non-attainment of ozone in Denver. So I got a phone call from EPA, and they were excited to let me know that, hey, good news, you're below the threshold. So my comment was, okay, that's great. Are you going to approve our state implementation plan? And the answer was no. We're going to defer. However, for all of the other 21 states where the model showed that they had exceeded the threshold, they used that information to justify issuing their federal implementation plan. So as a result of that, we filed suit and said that's not appropriate. And that is before the 10th Circuit currently. And concurrently, EPA has published in the Federal Register a notice to approve our state implementation plan. So they're running concurrently. We'll see how that ends. Hopefully, the result is an approval and we can move on. All right, well, that takes me to the Clean Power Plan. Under the Obama administration, they had what was called the Clean Power Plan 1.0. And then that was replaced by the ACE rule under the Trump administration. And now the current administration has developed this what we call the Clean Power Plan 2.0. What we've seen in our comments to EPA is that some of the same concerns and issues that we saw in the Clean Power Plan 1 are still there in the Clean Power Plan 2 version. And those are essentially is that it requires beyond what they call the fence line infrastructure, which is not covered under the Clean Air Act, in our view. It did not consider NEPA timelines. This was a big one for Western states. The timeline associated with NEPA on average is probably 6.5 years to get a NEPA document through. In some instances, we've seen it take 12 to 15 years for either a transmission line or a wind project. So that's something that needs to be addressed. It didn't address sage grouse and potential impacts to sensitive species. Insufficient time for implementation. This was a real big factor because even though if you read the Clean Power Plan 2.0, it'll tell you that you can use carbon capture and storage. However, because of the timeframes associated with the rule, it's essentially off the table. And so that's something that'll have to be reconciled. And then there's obviously the grid reliability concerns. So where are we with that? Right now, we are part of a 15-state coalition that will be meeting and having discussions about the Clean Power Plant 2.0 being facilitated by the Center for New Energy Economy. This is Bill Ritter, former governor of Colorado, Bill Ritter's group at the Colorado State University. So we'll be having ongoing discussions there about that. And then just one notable point, current CO2 emissions in Wyoming and in the US are at their lowest point right now since 1988. So there's clearly progress being made. All right, I'm going to switch to water. I did spend a lot of time on air quality because there's a lot happening in that area, but there's also a lot happening in water quality. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the first one is the waters of the United States. The Supreme Court just came out with their decision in the Sackett case, which essentially narrowed the standard, removed the significant nexus test. And Wyoming, however, Wyoming is one of 24 states that were granted an injunction as part of the North Dakota lawsuit where we joined there. And we will continue to operate on a pre-2015 WOTUS definition. And we have to say it that way because there were several, pre-2015, there were several amendments that have to be factored in. So along with the 24 states plus Texas, I think is also in that category. So probably 25 states, half the states will be under one version of WOTUS definitions and the other states under the new version. The new version is EPA issued a final rule on August 29th. There wasn't any additional public comment. They didn't think that they needed to do that. And they're proceeding with their definition. You know, in all likelihood, I anticipate that we'll see further litigation there. I would point out that under the previous administration, they had gathered up several states to have a conversation about, you know, what should we classify as water of the United States. I just remember the assistant administrator at the time, Dave Ross, who used to be one of our attorneys, by the way. But we were having this conversation, and he said, if only we had a map that we could utilize. Well, right behind him was this large map on the wall, and it said interstate waterways and railways. He said, there's your map. I said, that's a starting point. Everything on that map we can all agree to is a water of the United States. Now we just have to see how far beyond that makes sense. So anyway, I do see further discussion and litigation on that, unfortunately. But for Wyoming, we consider everything a water of the state. So even if the waters of the United States get scaled back, all of our waters are protected under our current statutory regime. Okay, the next water quality standards. We're in the process of doing our triennial review with our water quality standards. And I throw this one out. This is one that you might want to pay particular attention to, because there are going to be some significant changes to the system and to the standards. The biggest being that we'll have an improved classification system. So each water body will have specific classifications that they will be protecting moving forward. And the way it's been described to me is that currently we have a combo platter, and the new rule will be an a la carte option. So anyway, we began this process with stakeholder meetings in 2021. It was facilitated through the Hop School, and we certainly appreciated that. And now we're preparing for a Water and Waste Advisory Board meeting in the first or second quarter of 2024. So I would encourage you to keep an eye out for that and participate. All right, and then carbon sequestration. As I mentioned, we were the second state to receive primacy for the Class 6 UIC program. We have 3 permits that are in public notice, 3 permits to construct. We will have a public meeting, I believe it's October 24th, and that will close public comment, and then we will move forward with reviewing the comments that we receive. We do expect that we'll have 20 new applications in the next year. And you know, what's really there's a lot of interest right now in Class 6 UIC wells because of the Inflation Reduction Act 45Q changes, and there's a significant bump in tax incentives for carbon capture and storage, and also for CCUS, which would include enhanced oil recovery. With that, just mention that the Water Quality Division is going to host their first Wyoming Water Quality Conference in collaboration with the University of Wyoming. And that'll be held here, well, it'll be held at the conference center next door next week, October 17th and 18th, if the weather allows. Anyway, so I'll wrap up there and take any questions. I will be around this afternoon as well, if there's anything specific that you'd like to visit on. So.
Regulatory agency charged with protecting, conserving, and enhancing Wyoming's land, air, and water for the benefit of current and future generations. And my question to you is about this image that you have up that's extraordinarily violent and depicts white-collar man as at the absolute top of the food chain with zero reciprocity built into the system. It's only about extraction. And so my question to you is whether the state of Wyoming is willing to come into a more holistic approach to the management of our lands that is more reciprocal than an image that is just pure, unadulterated violence.
Okay, well, one, I wouldn't read too much into the picture. The point being made with that was that there is no free lunch, and that all the energy sources have impacts that we need to address. We do take our mission seriously, and we do that through working with EPA and establishing working with the standards that are established by EPA. And those standards are set as risk-based standards, and we implement those through our various programs. So that would be my response there. And I would just say that wasn't intended to be a violent incorporation there. It was simply to make a point that there is no free lunch.
Hi, Todd. Thanks. I resided in Lincoln Tower at the Ohio State University. Just want to get that out there. I wanted to ask on the self-audit process, is that apply to all multimedia, or was it just specifically Clean Air Act? Is it case by case, or is it holistic? And so if companies self-identified, had it listed, tried to work on it, then they were kind of exempt from EPA enforcement. Is that what you are implying?
Yeah. So the first part of your question is it specific just to air? No, it applies to all media. What we're seeing is that the companies that are using it specifically for air quality. There may be some that will broaden that. As far as what does that mean from a compliance standpoint? Yes, rather than taking enforcement, they go through the process. And again, as long as they comply with the requirements of the self-audit law. So if they do that, they will identify any non-compliance issues. They will correct those non-compliance issues, and then they will come up with a plan approved by the DEQ on how they're going to prevent those non-compliance issues from occurring in the future. If we do that, then EPA has agreed that they will not come in and overfile on the company and take separate enforcement action against them.
Okay, thank you. And then is there some documents out there that I can read or look at to understand the rationale why Wyoming took primacy on the Safe Drinking Water Act for disposal, underground injection wells, but didn't take it for drinking water? Was there some regulatory rationale or cost benefit rationale?
The rationale on the drinking water program and why we haven't taken that, I think, is largely because of the cost. We would be looking at, in our estimation, about 25 to 30 new full-time employees and an annual cost of about $5 million to implement the program. And although we may have disagreements from time to time with EPA over their implementation, we believe that the EPA is doing a reasonably good job of protecting our drinking water sources and working with our municipalities. Like I said, from time to time, we may have some disagreements, or our communities might have disagreements, and we'll work jointly with those communities and try to resolve those issues with EPA.
We'll take one last question here.
I wanted to ask a question about the EPA and Department of Interior are both have an increased emphasis on environmental justice. And I wondered how states like Wyoming as implementers are responding to that new emphasis.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we have developed within DEQ a non-discrimination policy, which really focuses on the civil rights laws. And what we've done is we created our own mapping system that can be utilized. There's this environmental justice map that EPA has put together, which can be used. We have our own that addresses some of the concerns that we had with the EPA model. But we also have identified areas where we can improve communication and make sure everybody has access to our documents. For example, on our website, you can convert any of our documents to any language that you like. The biggest area in Wyoming would be the Spanish-speaking communities. And so we've made adjustments to our public notices to make sure that they have access to the materials in in Spanish. But again, we can translate to any any language. All right. Well, thank you all.